Romeo says, "It is my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. It is my lady, oh, it is my love," he says of her, making it, repeating again that Juliet here is the object of his affection, not only his love, but also his lady, the one that he's devoted himself to, that he's put himself into her service. Sort of like the way that Dante sometimes talks about Beatrice. Oh, that she knew she were. I wish she knew that she is my lady and my. But she doesn't know that yet. She hasn't yet heard it from him. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses, I will answer it. She speaks, yet she says nothing. She's not literally speaking here, but rather her presence, the look in her eye, speaks in a way. Her eye discourses. Her eye is speaking. It's lively. It's active. It's communicating something about her beauty. She speaks, yet she says nothing. He says, her eye discourses, I will answer it. I will respond to what her eye is saying here, maybe trying to meet her glance or saying some words of affection. But then he changes his mind. I am too bold. I'm too bold. I need to be more restrained. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Her eye there is speaking, but not to him. Rather, two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, two of the most beautiful stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. As she looks at the sky, he says, two of the most beautiful stars in the sky, they have some business, they have something to do, and so they entreat, they beg, her eyes to twinkle in their spheres, in their place in the sky, until they return. Her eyes twinkle like stars. And so these stars there say, we have some place to be. Your eyes can sparkle up here until we come back. And then he'll continue that metaphor in the next 8 lines. Actually, let's just finish it now. What if her eyes were there, they in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars, as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. So these stars are begging her eyes to twinkle in place of them in the sky. And he says, what if her eyes were there? What if they actually were there and the stars were in her head in place of her eyes? Well, if the stars were there instead of her eyes, the brightness of her cheek would shame those stars. It would put them to shame. The same way that daylight puts a lamp to shame. A lamp can be very bright, and yet compared to daylight, it's just not even a fair comparison. He says her cheek is so bright. Forget about the brightness of her eyes. Her cheek is so bright that it would put the twinkling stars to shame if they were there in place of her eyes. And her eyes in heaven would, through the airy region, stream so bright, they would shine so brightly through the air that birds would sing and think it were not night. The birds would think it was daytime if her eyes, her bright eyes, were there in the sky shining in place of these stars. If her eyes and the stars switched places, the stars would not seem bright compared to her cheek. And it would be like daylight out because her eyes are so bright. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. As she's there, she leans her face on her hand. And he's just been admiring her eyes and then her cheek. We saw the hand as the major theme of the duet sonnet from just before then. Now, instead of wishing to be a pilgrim to kiss the shrine, he says, I wish I were a glove on that hand, that I might touch that cheek. All right, that's a great option. Also notice, just a quick poetic comment, most of Shakespeare's poetry is written using what's called blank verse. Or most of his plays are written what's called blank verse. Blank verse is non-rhyming, and it's also iambic pentameter. What does that mean? Well, non-rhyming means it doesn't rhyme. And iambic pentameter is the rhythm of the lines. So an iamb is when you have an unaccented syllable followed by an accent one. That's an iamb. And pentameter from Greek pente, meaning 5, there's 5 of those. So every line of poetry here has 10 syllables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the rhythm is ba-dum, 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 ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And normally, for blank verse, it has that rhythm, but it doesn't rhyme. But here we have one pair of lines that does rhyme. Rise in heaven would through the airy regions stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. Occasionally, Shakespeare will throw in some rhymed verses into his blank verse to emphasize something, to draw our attention to something. Or often it means the sort of end of a speech. So here, a glove upon that hand. But you'll notice if you pay close attention, and you shouldn't, when you recite, don't read it like this. This is exaggerated. But you notice that rhythm to each line. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green. None but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady, oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. That line's short. She speaks if she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold. I am too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. 2 of the fairest stars in all the heavens, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. There's this rhythm here, there's this pattern to it. Every line has 10 syllables. Sometimes there's 1 or 2 more. But that regular rhythm there is part of what sets this apart as poetry rather than prose. One of the things that makes Shakespeare such a skillful poet is that this rhythm, iambic pentameter, it's not too hard to write poetry using that meter in English. English naturally has that kind of rhythm. What's very hard, or what can be harder, is to write poetry that has that rhythm without sounding sort of bouncy and sing-songy. And Shakespeare is very good at making this seem natural in his characters. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. And so you can, if you're paying attention, you can notice the rhythm there, you notice the consistency, you feel that consistency. But it isn't hitting you in the face, like if we were to say, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise for sun and kill the envious moon. Da-dun, 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 da-dun. And sometimes if you try to write iambic pentameter, it often sort of sounds like that. And less skilled poets, it does sometimes sound like that. But here Shakespeare is of course the most masterful poet in the English language. He knows what he's doing. And it's very natural. All right, enough about that. We'll talk about the last speech there from the very end of the play, Romeo's speech before his suicide. We'll talk about that starting either tomorrow or next week. Right now, I'm going to distribute the books. Guys who are at home, either please find the text online, or you can come in and get one of these after school. But otherwise, I expect that you have the text either online or you have it at home. So let me give these out to the guys who are here, and we will get started with Lisa. Yeah. Yeah. So again, like with the Odyssey, and with the Inferno, these are yours, but please bring them, treat them reasonably respectfully. If you don't want them, when we're done, you can give them back to me and I'll keep them for lending to students who forget theirs. But otherwise, these are yours to keep, to add to your hopefully growing personal library. So here, I just want to talk a little bit about what is in the book. There's a lot of introductory material. There's about 60 pages or so of introductory material. A lot of this is really good information here. There's stuff about Shakespeare's world, about the historical background of the play. If you look at Roman numeral page 17, Roman numeral 17 says XVII. All the introductory pages are numbered using Roman numerals. There's some advice there about Shakespeare's language, and on page Roman numeral 27, we get some information about Shakespeare's life, his education, his literary influences. On Roman numeral 37, there's some information about the theater where Shakespeare's plays were performed, the Globe. There are a lot of illustrations here taken from books published during Shakespeare's lifetime and around that time period. Some more stuff about Shakespeare's plays. And then finally, after Roman numeral 53, the text actually starts. And they give you a couple of title pages here from the very earliest printings of this text. This book, unlike the other works that we've read, was written after the widespread use of the printing press. One of the big technological changes between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance is the widespread use of the printing press. Up until that point, books were all handwritten for the most part. The big invention that made the change there was the use of movable type. So where each letter is its own little piece of metal, and you put them into a frame. The big thing that Gutenberg, who usually gets credit for the whole printing press thing, what he really invented was a way of quickly making extra copies of the letters, of casting them out of lead, extra copies of the letters. Because if you're making a whole page of text, because you have to print forms for the letters, the type, those were cut by hand out of metal. And so what he invented was a process where he would use lead, molten lead, which is it's a nice soft metal, melts at a low temperature. It's poisonous, but there's that. Where they could quickly make extra copies of letters. And so once you had the one handmade version, then you could make as many extra copies of it that you wanted, and they look pretty much the same. And so, in the 16th century, we get this huge explosion of early books, lots of, a long time after that work was composed, were published in print. Shakespeare wrote them. There are some differences, copies that aren't exactly the same. Whereas when you're copying things by hand, mistakes get made. Things get misspelled. Sometimes words get skipped. Sometimes you accidentally repeat things. And it's only one copy of it. So if that gets lost, you're out of luck. But if you're printing something, if you're bothering to print it, you're probably printing off at least a few hundred copies, and they're all the same. And so we're able to have a very clear, it really changes the way that people approach written texts. because now instead of being difficult to come by and hard to pass down and often existing in different versions, now you get mass-produced editions that are all the same. And you can make slight adjustments in further editions or printings, something that people don't think about a lot because we're so used to things being printed or whether and then published either hard copy or digitally, where we think, okay, there's just one authoritative version of it. Like that's it. That's what the author wrote, and then that's what they published. But in fact, up until 600 years ago, that wasn't the case, where different people might have been reading different versions of the same text. This is one of the reasons why biblical scholarship is so complicated, because you have a very long period of time, you have a very wide geographic area, you have the scriptures being read in a lot of different languages, and then within those languages there are sometimes multiple versions. There were multiple versions of the Old Testament, mostly written in Hebrew, partially in Aramaic. Some parts might have been written in Greek. Then when it gets translated to Greek, there are actually a whole bunch of different Greek translations of it, and different versions of those Greek translations. So that's part of why that's a very complicated field in terms of the text. Anyway, I don't want to get too into that. Okay, and then you see on the next couple pages what the first pages look like here. This one on the right here, where it says from the 1623 First Folio. The First Folio, these are these early printings of all of Shakespeare's works. And so those are sort of the beginning of Act 1, Scene 1, after the prologue there. And when we get to the text in just a few minutes, you'll see it's the same. The spelling, English spelling at Shakespeare's time was different from now. One of the things that this edition here that they've done is they've modernized a lot of the spelling. So if you look, for example, the very first line there, will not carry coals. And so will, which we would spell W-E''L-L, here is spelled W-E-E''L. This is on, this would be Roman numeral 57. And then coals is spelled C-O-A-L-E-S, whereas we would leave out the E. If you look right above there, you see that name there, that's the other character present in the scene at that point, Samson. That thing that looks like an F after the P, that's a long S, which used to be used much more commonly. Samson, looks like Samson, but it's Samson there. And again, one of the things that they've done for you in this edition is they've gotten rid of those, which would have been common in Shakespeare's time. But it's good to take a look through that. You get an idea of how things would have been spelled in Shakespeare's time and what that would have looked like. Okay, keep flipping. Eventually we get to where it says the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. The page after that is a good one to be familiar with. This one says characters of the play, which means the characters of the play. The characters of the play. But here you have the different characters listed and briefly who they are. So first you get Romeo and his Montague, that's Lord Montague, his father, Lady Montague, Romeo's mother, Benvolio, their relative, their kinsman, and then Abram and Balthazar are these two servants of the Montagues. Then you've got all the Capulets, all Juliet's family, Juliet, Capulet, her father, Lady Capulet, her mother, the nurse to Juliet, Tybalt, Petruchio, and then a few other guys. Then you have the sort of neutral characters. It's good to make notes on here. You get Montagues, then Capulets, then the neutral characters in the next group. Aeschylus is the name of the prince. Paris, the man that... Then we get some minor characters, Friar Lawrence, another friar, apothecary, that's the pharmacist, and then some other people. The last thing to mention is chorus. The chorus is something not used a whole lot now in plays, but it was very common, used from the time of the ancient Greeks. These represent the common people who are watching the actions take place. So sometimes they'll comment on the action going on, And we're supposed to identify with the chorus often, watching this stuff happen in their city. Sometimes they still get used in plays, but not whole. All right, finally, we get to the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, Act 1. Yay! Turn the page. So this is page 6 and 7. And here we see the format that this book follows. On the right, you have Shakespeare's text. You see funny marks in some places, like where it says enter chorus. That means that's a word that they've added in. That isn't in the early editions of Shakespeare, but they've added it in there to help us out. So enter chorus, and then at the end chorus exit. Like we see here. And then on the other places, the numbers there are the line numbers that they connect with. So line 0, chorus. The character who addresses the audience commenting on the action. Here, this commentary is in the form of a sonnet. Then we see line 1, dignity. Here means social position. And line 3, mutiny means riot. 4, civil. We ask about them. You can check the notes over here, and they'll often give you some useful information about the text there. All right. So here we can read the chorus. Read the prologue again. And this is one of your options. Enter chorus. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventure, piteous overthrows, do with their death, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage, which, if you with patient ears attend, here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. The chorus exits. The notes there, they give you a little summary of what happens in this act and scene. This is 1.1 there. That means Act 1, Scene 1. This play is 6 scenes. Some of the scenes are very short. Some are fairly long. But the way that we break up a novel into chapters, or Dante breaks his up into cantos, or Homer into books, as they're called, plays are broken up into acts and then into scenes. So you got the play, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5, and then each one of these is going to have scenes. So you've got Act 1, Scene 1, Act 1, Scene 2, maybe Act 1, Scene 3, maybe Act 1, Scene 4 and 5, and almost those have 2 acts. And there's a break in between an intermission. Here, you probably put the break here between 3 and 4, maybe between 2 and 3. But the idea here is that each of these acts is one smaller piece of the play, and it might take place in multiple locations. Each change in location usually is going to be a different scene. That's what scene means. Scene means the scene means the backdrop. So whenever you're changing the backdrop, whenever you're changing the setting, that's a new scene. You can think of those like, the scenes really are sort of like chapters, and then the acts are like groups of chapters. Okay, but here, the first act is going to sort of set the stage. The prologue has already introduced us to what's going to happen. Act 1 is going to set the stage. In each act, we're going to see some further major development of the plot. All right, so let's take a look here at the beginning of the play. We'll start with the description here of the introduction. This is like with the Inferno, those little summaries at the beginning of each canto. They're going to give us one for each of these scenes. So when you're reviewing, make sure you're at least reading those because that will refresh the major events in your mind. Those are good things to pay attention to. The Montagues and Capulets with death if they fight again. A melancholy Romeo enters and is questioned by his cousin Benvolio, who learns that the cause of Romeo's sadness is unrequited love, unreturned love. Oh, poor Romeo. Okay, the first part of this, when this fight starts, there's a lot of there are a lot of jokes being made. Some of them are dirty jokes, words. But often these words that he's playing on, we don't use anymore, or they mean different things now. So we started. What a buckler is. A buckler is a little shield. At this time, the style of sword fighting that they would use would be either with actually old fashioned. So you'd have your sword in your dominant hand. You have your buckler. This is sword. The idea is not so much that it protects a large part of your body, but so that you can move it very quickly. It's a very fast-paced kind of fighting. At Shakespeare's time, really, they were transitioning more to you'd have a sword in one hand and a dagger in the other one, which again, it would serve a similar role that the buckler would, where it's still more attacking as well. So even if you're not, maybe the dagger can come in there as well. Okay, but anyway, they have swords and bucklers. They're read aloud, and we had people reading particular characters. So, do I have a volunteer to read one of these, and I'll read the other one?
I'll be Gregory.
All right, you do Gregory. So I'll be Samson. Gregory, on my word, will not carry coals.
No, for them we should keep coils.
Colliers.
Colliers.
I mean, and we being collar will draw.
Aid while you live. Draw your neck out of the collar.
I strike quickly.
Is to stand. Therefore, if thou art moved, thou runnest away.
A dog of that house shall move me to stand. I will take the wall of any man or maid of Montague's.
That shows thee a weak slave, for the weakest goes to the wall.
'Tis true, and therefore women, being the weaker vessels, are ever thrust to the wall. Therefore, I will push Montague's men from the wall, and thrust his maids to the wall.
The quarrel is between our masters and us, their men.
'Tis all one. I will show myself a tyrant. When I have fought with the men, I will be civil with the maids. I will cut off their heads.
The heads of the maids?
Aye, the heads of the maids, or their maiden heads. Take it in what sense thou wilt.
They must take it in. Sense that feel it.
Me they shall feel while I am able to stand, and 'tis known I am a pretty piece of flesh.
'Tis well thou art not fish. If thou hast.
They're sort of bantering back and forth. So if you read the beginning, he says, Samson says, will not carry coals. Carrying coals being an expression meaning to let other people walk over. It says, I mean, and, that means if, we be in color, will draw. And then choler, C-H-O-L-E-R, means anger. If we're angry, we'll draw. Then there's some jokes about playing on different meanings of the women cutting off their heads. And then he says, yes, the heads of the maidens, or their maiden heads. Maiden head means virginity. So I'll cut off their heads, whichever sense you want that to mean, the maidens' heads. And then Gregory responds to that. He says, they must take it in sense that feel it. And Samson replies, me they shall feel while I am able to stand. And 'tis known I am a pretty piece of flesh. If that sounds dirty to you, it is. All right. I think it means exactly what that is up. Can we have a volunteer to read Abram? All right. So Samson says, my naked weapon is out. Quarrel, I will back thee.
How? Turn thy back and run.
Fear me not.
No, marry, I fear thee.
By marry. No, marry, I fear thee. Samson says, let us take the law of our sides. Let them begin.
I will frown as I pass by, and let them take it as they list.
Nay, as they dare. I will bite my thumb at them, which is disgrace to them if they bear it. And then he bites his thumb. So this is like giving them the finger. He says, let's keep the law on our side. Let them start the fight. And Samson, Gregory says, I'll frown at them, and they can take it however they want it. And Samson says, no, I'm going to bite my thumb at them. I'm going to give them the finger. And then if they put up with that, then that means that they're cowards. So he bites his thumb. And Abram says,
do you bite your thumb with us, sir?
I do bite my thumb, sir.
Do you bite?
Without talking to the other characters. He says, if I say yes, I'm flipping you off. Are we going to be in legal trouble? And he says, no, the law will not be on your side, because then it's like you started the fight. No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but...
do you quarrel, sir?
Quarrel, sir? No, sir.
But if you do, sir, I am for you. I serve as good a man as you.
Not bad.
Yes, better, sir.
You lie.
Draw, if you be men. Gregory, remember thy washing blow. They fight. Benvolio then shows up. This is Romeo's friend. Says, part, fools! Drawing his sword. Put up your swords. You know not what you do.
Turn these. Benvolio.
Yep.
Look upon thy death.
I do but keep the peace. Put up thy sword, or manage it to part.
Use and thee have thee coward.
They fight. Enter 3 or 4 citizens with clubs or partisans. Clubs, obviously. Partisans are like big axes for fighting with. Clubs, bills, and partisans, strike, beat them down. Down with the Capulets, down with the Montagues. And a line with the Montagues shows up, and Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, showing up and starting this fight. We're continuing this fight. All right, now we're going to have Lord Capulet is nearby. He's there with his wife. And he says, what noise is this? Give me my longsword. Oh, a crutch. I call you for a sword. His wife responds to him. So Capulet's there. He shows up. He asks for his sword. And his wife,
A crutch.
a crutch. Yeah, you should be getting like your cane, not your sword. She says, calling for a sword. Page 14, you see there are some partisans of the time. Notice these are pole weapons.
What was the point of all the different shoes?
For different scenarios. So like you notice the top one there, the pensioner's halberd, that's letter A, the very top, is good for using at a distance. If somebody's rushing at you, maybe on horseback, the spear is good for that. The hammer is good against somebody in some kind of a hooking thing. Yeah, the different shapes, some of them obviously are decorative, like that one that has the battle axe that has the frilly spike on the back. I mean, the spike on the back is functional, but the frilly bits are probably mostly just for decoration. Yeah, otherwise they're for different scenarios. If you look at the bottom two, the one is here labeled as a poleaxe, but really it's like a war hammer. It's got the hammer end there on towards the bottom and the hook on the back. And the one right below that is the same thing, but has a spike on the back, which is extra good against people in armor. And it's got the spearhead on top as well. So just, yeah, for all sorts of different nasty things that you might want to do to somebody.
If you was really getting poked,
Say it again?
really getting poked.
Yes. Yep. Yep. You also notice that A has some, possibly it's a handguard. I think actually what that probably is it's a frill on there. Some kind of like a, like made out of horsehair or tassels or something. And the advantage of that is that if somebody's like standing closer to them.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's what that is rather than a hand. But I don't know enough about the weaponry of the time to say for sure. Some of them also, you notice they have a pointed end on the other end, probably less for attacking people with than for sticking in the ground. Yeah, you also notice, just one last thing, the second weapon from the top, the Hungarian partisan, that letter after the I and before the A in partisan is one of these long S's. It's not partifin, it's partisan with an S. All right, that's it. Gone a little bit over. We'll continue tomorrow with Act 1, Scene 1.